Colleagues, please take your seats.
We are going to start our round table. Actual PR culture, how to overcome imitation, what the cultural policy should look like. We are also expecting Mr. Ukrainian Minister of Culture and also Mustafa Nayem, MP from Petro Poroshenko Bloc. They are going to join us a bit later. Now I would like to give the floor to Natalia Grevdesh. She is a representative of RPR. She's going to be moderator of this discussion for 2 hours from now. So please speak into the microphone. Speak not to be fast, because we have simultaneous translation, and just to make your work more comfortable for our live transmission. Good afternoon, esteemed audience, esteemed colleagues and guests. We are impressed by the level of the presence here. Thank you for the fact you found the slot in busy schedule. We are going to talk about the professional environment, expert environment, the European group, who has been working for 4 months now. The first meetings we had last December, but we actually formed on 16th of April. This is our first attempt to appear in the live environment. The major objective, we believe to be, we are talking about the RPR culture group. So our main objective is to be involved in the process of reform of the legislation. First of all, the critical net of correspondence to the challenges which form today the internal external environment, what is actually makes us to reform the culture, speak about the values, practical steps, the cultural technologies, and a lot of other things. And the logic of our today's meeting is as follows. We are going to start with a short information about our cooperation with the Committee of Culture and Spirituality. Perhaps you'll be interested to know that we have such a committee. In our first attempt took place quite recently. This is a first draft law in the sphere of culture. We are going to talk about the strategy which is proposed by the Minister of Culture. In the constructive part of this meeting, we are going to suggest a thesis or several theses which work in a version. We call it the Cultural Policy Directive, which I believe to be the most important today. Please remember that we have a professional discussion, and the controversial nature of the statements or theses should not prevent us from remember that we have to respect each other's point of view. Discussion doesn't mean the criticism. Criticism means the attempt to turn the processes and our attempts into some constructive things. Honestly speaking, I don't know. I'm doing that for the first time. Just tell me, do I have to present here everybody here, or it's now that you have their names on your list? Okay, thanks a lot. The first issue we're going to discuss are the draft laws. Elena, you have the floor. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Elena Salata, and I'm going to tell you why actually we would like to draw attention to the law drafts 2669, 2669-1. Those are draft laws which they try to introduce into the competition procedure, contest procedure by the managers of the cultural establishments. And the first draft law is the draft law which was initiated by the Ministry of Culture. We call it the Cadman draft law, and the second draft law is the one which which actually became an alternative one, which was submitted by the Irina Podolyak MP and other MPs which were involved in the work related to this draft law. Why we believe this draft law are a graphic example of imitation of the central, let's say, authority dealing with culture. The draft law 2669, actually, it makes provision for some changes in nominating the personnel in the sphere of culture, to introduce some tenders, competitive contests, and nothing else. And all those functions have to be based on the standardized documents which are going to be developed or drawn up by the Minister of Culture later on, which demonstrates lack of transparency of this procedure, though we propose one of the first key positions, key components of reform, the transparency, legitimacy of implementation of reforms. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. I would like to offer my comments regarding the first item, which mentioned Elena. I'm talking about the procedure for nominating the competition committee. Just, not to speak about my details about each sub-item, which we discussed with the Minister of Culture yesterday during our meeting. I'm going to draw attention to the major important things, which I believe that all of them really require some elaboration. The first item is the procedure for the establishment or setting this competition committee, because this is not absolutely described in the document 2669 initiated by the Minister of Culture in the draft the draft law of Irina Podolyak. This is we have this description, but this is not detailed. We have a lot of comments regarding this, and we believe that we have to really make the details of detailed description of those procedures. Who is going to select the members of this committee, and which will determine how this procedure is going to be implemented later on. Actually, another point which doesn't exist in any of the two draft laws, the candidates. We believe that the candidates who is going to offer his, let's say, he applied for that, he not only has to demonstrate his titles or ranks or whatever else, his positions, but the platform and the program, what he's going to do on this position, which is logical. Also, his competence, taking in consideration the professional experience in the sphere which is taken care of by this specific cultural establishment or agency. And again, somebody has to exercise control over this procedure. So we suggest to create a special agency or department, each cultural division, which is the mission and function, which must include control and monitoring of the activities of this candidate for this position, how he implements or she implements this program, and how his activities coincide with the platform he used for the nomination of his or her. Actually, we started the cooperation with the both groups which present this draft law. We discussed our position with Irina Podolyak, and we introduced our position to be included in the draft law. Yesterday, we met with the Committee of Culture and Spiritual Development, and we also and actually mentioned what we offered to them. We do hope that they will hear to us, and we are going to provide those legitimate components of advocacy in order to implement our principles into the legislation. There is one more point which I forgot, which also is associated with state-by-state nature of introduction of this draft law, because we know the specifics of the small cities or big cities, towns, whatever else, and different spheres of culture. And maybe comments should be, no, there are no comments, okay. We believe that this state-by-state nature should be described in the transitional provisional provisions, which have to ensure the structural nature and state-by-state introduction of this project or draft law. Questions will follow after the presentation of our experts. Perhaps you have to introduce so that everybody knows who is who. Elena, please, if I can, very briefly, Elena Salata, head of the NGO Cultural Assembly. I'm a lawyer. Victor Ruban, choreographer, researcher, curator, working in the sphere of the modern art. I represent here the Association of the Modern Dance. There was a question, okay? Good afternoon, my name is Ganushin. I'm head of the Ukrainian, the Union of Musicians of Ukraine. I have the following question regarding the two draft laws for development of musical culture. The alternative draft law which you mentioned regarding the introduction of the contractual-based format, where can we actually acquaint ourselves with that? We represent here more than 3,000 musicians, and we would like to know what are the components or the, let's say, of this draft law. As far as I know, we do not have the free access to that document. Where we can read about that or acquaint ourselves with that. The second question, you mentioned that you are going to introduce all kind of competition, right? Or contest. We are not against that, but I have the question. You mentioned that in each locality they will have some kind of a council to be established, which is going to exercise control over each performer, roughly speaking, or the author or composer. Will not lead to more complexity and the corruption. I mean, further deepening corruption component. We have a lot of orchestras or different musical groups or collectives which are guided by some, let's say, leader or whoever else, who have some private relations with some of the musicians. If you're also are going to introduce some supervisory body or board over the musicians, and then plus the management, you will make this kind of corrupt scheme will make it even more elaborated. I'm talking about the one which exists now. Thank you. So maybe Elena will answer your question. This draft law was submitted by the Cabinet of Ministers, and the second one by Irina Podolyak MP, not by us. We try to further improve that, but in order to do that, we have to get acquainted with that. Answering your first question, any kind of draft law which is submitted for the consideration by Verkhovna Rada, and before that it is published, has to be published on the official VR website, and there in the you can see the legislature, see the both of the alternative draft laws, explanatory note pertaining to each of those, comparative table, comparison given from the existing legislation, the full set of the documents. So you can go to the Verkhovna Rada site and see them there. So then I have a proposal. Whenever you are going to start this competition must be absolutely independent. We already wrote about that in our proposal submitted to those who are working on the long-term development strategy. I'm talking about those people who are not part of some administrative organizations. Just my comments regarding your second question. First of all, it's exactly why we offer this mechanism of the forming or establishing this competition committee in order not to allow the corruption scheme you are talking about. Regarding your comment, which pertains to the artistic composition, so to say, this procedure and this kind of the council doesn't have to deal with every draft law or every project which is being implemented within the framework of this specific establishment. We are talking about the control over the implementation, the work of the manager of this specific establishment. So please, when you read this draft law, this where it contains the description. But thank you anyway for your question. According to our schedule, Mr. Vladyslav Pioro would like to comment on this issue. So please speak into my microphone. You have several minutes at your disposal, Vladyslav. Thank you for the possibility given to me to provide my comments on this very important issue. We do not even have to talk about the pluses of this procedure and transparency and avoidance of conflicts, which unfortunately we are witnessing based on the well-known establishment of culture, first of all, museums and reserves or preserves. Also, we are talking about the changes in the reform and the managerial system of this sphere, because we are talking about the management who can be a more full-fledged from the point of view of the community and whatever else. In the history of those two draft laws, there is a third component. Maybe there are more than that, but the third component is actually lobbying by the museum community or representatives of museum community of the competition we had, and let's say, I mean, the firings are absolutely misunderstood by everybody, whatever. At last we can say thank you to everybody who participates in this process, both the Minister of Culture and the Committee of Culture and the Spirituality. And so there is some kind of response. Speaking about this response, I absolutely agree here with the comments voiced here that in the governmental or the cabinet ministers draft law, there is some risk regarding the whole declaration to take care of the resolution of this issue. So there is a risk to fix the status quo, because the whole mechanism, the whole procedure is contained in the bylaw. And we know that all the bylaws are not adopted, and all laws are blocked. So after adoption of this draft law, it's very important to adopt the bylaw in such a form that this procedure could work to maximum possible optimum extent.
And in this, our Committee of Culture and Spirituality, they've decided to make a step forward and to use this practice when the law is being formed to minimize the number of bylaws. As regards the Competition Commission, I agree with it, and I would call upon everybody to check for the draft procedure of competitive selection of museum institutions as suggested by the Museum Council with the Ministry of Culture, published this April on Museum Environment website, and that's an interesting development done by the Council of previous convocation. So the model suggested in the document, and it concerns parity, right to suggest quotas on experts from various professional institutions and groups and civic society organizations. It does provide for maximum objectiveness of presentation, and it still contains possibility for formal requirements rather than describing them in relevant regulations. And I think this will really shape the trust of the whole procedure. And it is also necessary to step away from previous practices of the ministry when the Commission worked as an advisory body offering specific suggestions to the minister, who then was well suited to do it unilaterally. Thank you, Vladyslav. And coming back from the presumption of lack of understanding principle, as my colleagues say, our RPR culture group became involved in the effort to analyze and appreciate two pieces of draft legislation, one suggested by the Parliament, another by the Cabinet. Based on the results, we will gather together once again to deliver the results. And please remember that there will be only just one legislation motion to the Parliament for consideration. We also have some slight changes in the program or the agenda of our meeting because of the minister, Vladyslav joining us. Let's give the floor to him. Thank you for this invitation. I think these slight changes in the program may be useful because it is about dialogue that we're having here. I think that we are all set to accept the discussion of these two pieces of legislation, draft legislation, as our joint exercise, joint effort, because if they're not needed by the public, then it means it is not necessary to review them in the parliament. When we were elaborating the governmental document, the governmental bill, it was not done by officials in the government, it was done by representatives of the culture sector, and it actually came from the group on reform of theatrical art that is chaired by Mr. Moiseyev, artistic director of the theater after Ivan Franco. So their deliberations included possibilities and chances of coming up with decent contract for both theater directors and theater staff members. Yes, there are competitive selection procedures, contract-based procedures in place, and because of that, the ministry decided to include these considerations in the bill, mentioning there that managers of all cultural institutions at all levels should be appointed on a contractual basis, but only after competitive selection procedure. And this is the position of principle voiced by the ministry that should be supported by the parliament to become a law, to make it into the law. The alternative bill is also of interest. It has been promoted by my colleagues, by MPs from the coalition, not from the ruling coalition, not from the opposition. And this clearly says that our additional possibilities for fruitful cooperation. And this alternative bill just provides more detail about competitive selection, about qualification requirements to candidates, etc. And it has some considerations to the composition of the commission. And we are not against having these details already in the bill. It will explore the text a bit and the language, but it can be there. The two bills were reviewed at the by the Parliamentary Committee on Culture and Spirituality. And I think we need to look into consensus on these two pieces of legislation. I had a meeting with Elena, an MP from Samopomich. She authored the draft legislation that, and I think that we need to come up with a balanced solution, and we need to think about the procedure as to what legislation, how we will vote for, whether we will vote for one bill and then seek how to include some amendments from another competing bill. There are options. I am more in favor of a political decision with the bill getting the majority of votes, then going to the committee session for final review. And I think one of the key tasks here is to avoid any political bias at nomination of cultural institution managers. Surely there is a lot of discussion about who's been appointed to what position, whether it was correct or not. But I still think that the implementation of a competitive selection procedure will not provide a final solution to this problem. Because ultimately it will be the minister who will have to decide from a number of candidates pre-selected according to the selections procedure. This is the nature of any sort of competition in this area. So whether it will be with detailed description of the competitive selection procedure or not. During previous negotiations we agreed on our joint position that selection and nomination of manager for some top level cultural institutions should go without the previous early idea of a number of candidates, exactly 3 candidates suggested, one by the ministry, another by the parliament, followed by the cabinet of ministers. This is clearly a political solution that should be avoided, and it means political bias in this nomination will be in place. It is really not necessary to involve neither the cabinet nor the president or the parliament in that. But in all other matters and things, I think the Ministry of Culture is really looking for fruitful cooperation in there. Thank you. So may we conclude that the bill of the cabinet and the one prepared by MPs will be joined to make a single piece to be offered for the review of the parliament, right? Okay, thank you. I may ask you to come up with your questions, to save them for the final Q&A session to save on time. And please don't forget to switch off your mics because it will otherwise interfere with the interpretation. I'm Mariana Matveychuk, research fellow from Les Kurbat's Research Center for Culture. I'd like to put a question to the initiative group on theatrical art reform. And I'd like to refer actually to this group and suggest that the ministry has a number of such similar sectoral groups promoting legislation as a measure of having an unbiased procedure. I'm totally in favor of it. Thank you, dear colleagues. That was our attempt to analyze the 2 draft legislations. The information is on our website. Feel free to ask more questions on the website or here directly in the audience. We have experts from our RPR group here. They will be glad to answer your questions. We come logically from the previous topic to the strategy that the Ministry of Culture suggests. The position of our RPR culture group on this strategy. I'm Volodymyr Kadyhrob, art manager. Speaking of RPR culture group position regarding the cultural strategy suggested by the ministry, we are of opinion that the document in general is a key piece that may not be overestimated because it is about a program that will affect not just the cultural development but on the process of our country's integration into the EU, and it will directly affect social conflicts and mitigate these conflicts in our country. Then the document will provide positive feedback on innovation-based sectors in our economy. Unfortunately, the program of national security of Ukraine announced by the presidential administration yesterday has no mention of culture, unlike, say, the situation in Russia when they have it included in the national security policy. In my view, this clearly connects to the real aggressive stance of Russia in pursuing their policy. But the documents we have here in Ukraine has no mention of culture as a part and parcel of national security, national level security. Then the PRP culture group thinks that the very ideology of the document has not been established because trying to come up with such a lengthy and comprehensive documents in under 2 months is potentially risky. And given short deadlines established by the Cabinet of Ministers in relation to the European Integration Action Plan we have here, I think it still may not serve the reason for too much haste with the development of cultural policy, the haste that we still witness now. Despite the document is part of an action plan of the government, a number of key points in the strategy as regards specific functions and responsibilities of the ministry that have to be made in line with the applicable European standards. This is a root of problem, and I think Victoria Kolesnykova will contribute to the. Hello, I'm Victoria Kolesnykova, and I'm a candidate of sciences and a CEO of the Library Fund. I think the discussion of the document should be subject to a lengthy discussion, and you may not be able to uncover the whole range of topics within this time span we have here, but we could rather concentrate on some key topics. Why we said on an attempt of imitation that my colleague mentioned. When we take the coalition agreement, the piece that concerns the national memory and culture, there was a strict mention of culture development, and it said about the need to make functions and responsibilities of the Ministry of Culture to make them compliant with applicable EU standards. And in our view, this is the key point of concern, because the strategy of culture suggested by the ministry has no mention of it. The strategy should rather focus on ways of reforming the structure, the ministerial structure inherited from the Soviet time, from the Soviet past. If someone has problems with understanding the root of the problem, I will explain now. The Ministry of Culture in the Soviet time, like it was with many Soviet republics, it was just an institution meant to further ideological presets established by the Communist Party. It was about spreading a uniformly made pro-communist product to be distributed through all the regime channels. It was the only key task for that ministry. And the second important task, also for the then Soviet Ukrainian ministry, was to imitate the existence of Ukrainian culture in the Republic, to pretend there is Ukrainian culture in the Republic which is successfully developing. And meanwhile, it was the Procrustean situation when effectively the national culture was nivellated and brought to the limits and confines of the Soviet model of culture. So until we have this philosophy of vertical culture managing pyramid, we may not even think or dream about any meaningful cultural product being developed based on this philosophy.
And the rest, we will see what happens, and maybe our colleagues will take courage. I have just a very short comment. The Sherman, editor-in-chief of the Antiquarian magazine. I would like to say that following those two speeches, I would like to emphasize, place an accent which I believe to be a real principle matter. We are talking about very complicated, very comprehensive things regarding the reforming of culture, strategic tasks and missions. But I believe until we resolve the first strategic problem, all the other problems will remain intact. I believe such tasks to be the penetration of the sphere of culture in the information space. The same way the Soviet method of dissemination of culture, spreading of culture was ruined. And hence culture, not as the means of ideology, and generally speaking, the means of subsistence or existence, as the only fundamental, let's say, vital possibility of the nation to show the content of our existence is deprived. It is deprived of this, the means of transmission, because nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows what kind of cultural product is being produced, neither the country per se, nor the world, nobody. Thank you. We heard your major idea, Maybe we'll just continue the discussion. Larysa Artyuhina, director, then Buzz. Actually, I would like to depart from our topic. I'm going to return in a minute from now, but very important thing which I would like to emphasize. I believe there's a turning point in our history because the cultural group appeared. We have this kind of RPR roadmap. There is not a word mentioned about the culture because there was no cultural group. We are talking about whatever, reform banking sector, pension reform, whatever else. But this is all of this is culture, and we were born not today, but we present today this roadmap, and we do hope that this wonderful document will be corrected and will be somewhat different will also contain mention the cultural reform. I believe that the 1 year of existence of the art workers actually resulted in this kind of historical document signed with Mr. Mishuk and Mr. Krylenko was present. During that, more than a year ago, this document was named their memorandum. I believe that we are going to talk about that because not a single item on this contained this document was implemented or was fulfilled. So we have to analyze what we didn't have, what we didn't do, what we did, and move ahead, move further. Actually, I have the impression that this document was not written in this planet, even not only not in this country. We have the impression that the people or the state exists somewhere else, and the Ministry of Culture in some other territory. We have the warfare in our territory, and we find ourselves in the constantly in the TV broadcasting zombie, and if you will, while our citizens, not only in the East, we are living through a situation of creating some kind of cultural phantoms, which make people to fight each other. Brother against the brother, the strategy doesn't say anything about that. They only mention that we have to improve and further perfect everything we have. But unfortunately, we still do not have the lustration process in the Ministry of Culture. And the people who work there, they just fulfill their function, nothing personal, People who occupied or embraced the same positions or offices during the previous authorities. And, it's only logical the strategy was born, Again, the war is waged against Ukraine by the terroristic party Ukraine, sponsored by Russia. We are talking about 1.5 million of the IDPs or refugees, we can name spade a spade, We have to think how to help them. The situation of cultural and humanitarian catastrophe in the East even is not mentioned. It doesn't exist among the strategical missions or tasks of the Ministry of Culture. I believe it's worthwhile to come back to consideration of this strategy, to this huge and large-scale discussion in the expert and professional environment. I believe that our today's roundtable and this first talk will be just the first talk. Maybe on a weekly basis or maybe every 10 days we will have a possibility to meet together and stop the war in the minds of our people, and this strategy will actually take care of that. Thank you, Larysa. Once again, I would like to remind you that the position of our peer culture group actually deals with a very serious new understanding of culture. Culture is not sphere. Please, colleagues, put it commit to paper. This is not a sector, it's not a service, not a branch. Culture does not serve neither or either the state or any other structures. As one of our colleagues said, it is DNA of human existence. So we'd like to change one of our objectives, to change the attitude towards culture. This is not something which takes place after any kind of banquet, and also the quotation of one of our colleagues, and proceed from the fact that it's not a sphere, not a branch or sector. We allowed ourselves to criticize the strategy of the Ministry of Culture. Should our colleagues have something to say, it would be our pleasure to listen to you. If not, maybe I'll give the floor to the authors of this. Okay, Oleg Pakalchuk, I'm a social psychologist. I'm dealing with the military crisis, psychology, and practical dimension. So sitting here and listening, if we had this live transmission to our checking points, I wonder, would they understand at least the word of what we mentioned here? I'm not the follower politicizing of this process, unlike the official point of view, for a simple reason. Politicization in our country, you're talking about corruption, to put it, or to name it using some other words with the nice English terms, the critical process which we are living through, and the practice shows this could be really ill perceived. So culture is not some kind of cause, and not the process of restoration artifacts. And the governmental draft laws, whatever they may be, my memory maybe tells me that they contain the major items that we are going to honor the historical heritage, and item number two, give us money to do that. Whatever the draft laws would be nice or nicely prepared, drawn up, etc., etc. But the liabilities of the expenditure lines remains unclear. We always wage war in Ukraine for the contents, and that this category doesn't work in principle and is not taking into consideration those strategies. I'm not surprised at that fact, because the lack of such an approach at the governmental level actually led to this war. And discussion in the content space, or the meaning space, which is specified by our public figures, it reminds me just placing the debates. Change the places of the debates to different locations. Again, if they're talking about the document prepared by the Minister of Culture, it's a document about the trade. I remember the Bush senior president of the United States, in his speech, the Western vices and the recommendations, they're so much comfortable and convenient, seemingly to us, because our people, they have our own interests. Our task is to change the system of authority in this country. This is a major task. This is something why we were starting to do something about that. So the system, the previous system of authority in the cultural dimension, this is the study of what the people would like to have, and then there has to have some continuation in the behavioral dimension, not only in the artifacts, meaning of that. I would say that such an approach, combined with the bearers of this approach, we had some kind of saying, it would be very difficult to translate in English. The first device were the best because they were stayed with us for a short time and they left, whatever it means. And again, we are going to change the approaches toward the culture, whatever they are. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Serhiy, please. Serhiy Grabar. Writer, director of Just Festival Unity. Just a couple of remarks from my side. We are at the historic place now. You remember this historic part of the city, and we have a monument to Saint Volodymyr nearby. And he made a breakthrough in the history of this country. Maybe it could be called only otherwise, but anyway, it was the time when a portion of income of the state went for the culture development of the country, for the development of culture of the old Kiev Rus state. And it resulted in his son Yaroslav establishing the most powerful nation on this land of that time. And the overall approach to what we call culture now, and culture is ever pervasive in every walk of our life, and we need to understand that no one can fare and manage without culture, and culture is primary, not secondary, in everything. So We need to have this approach changed at the topmost level, not at the level of the Ministry of Culture. There should be a universal change in the approach to culture. We need to change our system of coordinates. The whole system of our bearings and coordinates had been changed long before Soviet times. It was about the time when Ukraine as the nation was ruined, and we need to come back to it. Thank you. We invited here the director of the Ukrainian Culture Research Center, Mr. Oleksandr Butsenko. So our center was the coordinator of the process of strategy development, and surely the strategy was being developed for a decade, not 2 months, as it was stated before. And I'm glad and thankful to have this nice meeting here, but we're just a bit too late with it. There was a statement that starting from 15th of April we are ready to get all the changes and amendments and in sort of dialogues. But we see that the final version of the strategy was really changed. This whole structure of it was changed. The content was changed. We got more than 100 of very substantial suggestions for improvement from individuals, from international organizations, like from the Eastern Partnership Culture Program and other partners. And it was good to have it. Really, the association documents that Ukraine has signed has barely 4 mentions of culture. But on the other hand, there is a growing recognition in the EU of the impending role of culture in the modern development, and representatives of numerous international organizations I've met with lastly, including the delegation of the EU to Ukraine, they have been very mindful of the growing role of culture in overall development. But again, if we take the ex-Soviet countries that made it into United Europe, like the Baltic states, or post-socialist, as we call them, countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, it all started with strategies revisited and revised there. Yes, they had their ministries transformed, and say in Lithuania, they called for Ernst & Young to review the internals of the ministry, and they also sacked a third of their personnel. We need to restructure the ministry as well here. Being a research unit with the ministry, we are cognizant of the need of great changes, and we have told Vyacheslav Kirilenko many times about the need for change. But again, it is about changes, global changes to a more global national system. And these reform attempts are really a great pain for us, because it's about the whole ecosystem in the ministry and of the ministry. We're coming down to staffing and manning potential, etc. And the strategy we've been discussing is just a living document to be further developed and refined. The first part of it covers specific precepts and concepts of culture that we've suggested as a unifying part of it, and the second part concerns specific steps to be made. Some of them have been already mentioned here, like competitive selection procedure and contract-based employment of managers of cultural institutions. It also includes a range of other measures to be taken in a variety of sectors if we are to see some general changes. And Oleg mentioned it correctly that we need not to forget about the sense, the inner sense and inner content of change. But again, we are not the developers, we are collectors, gatherers that try to get these bits of information and suggest it for final discussion. But who's the developer? I think the people, the nation is. say the strategy of Australia development says that the culture is not created by either the government or related ministry. It is done by the country and its people. You mentioned the situation in Donbass and the concept of the strategy. You know, it is about priority steps to be made. If there is no mention of it, please suggest something. Give some specific suggestions. We will surely come up with a detailed proposal. Come on, we've been talking for 3 months in a row about that, but we were not officially present 3 months ago. By way of remark, it has been said that post-communist countries went through an audit. I can remember you that there was a memorandum signed in presence of Mr. Kirilenko about half a year ago, which included steps about the audit of the ministry. There was a language on a system of guarantees of financial openness and transparency to be established in the ministry, and actually, Mr. Nishuk and Mr. Kirilenko were present at the time of signing this memorandum. By the way, it was done even by the Ministry of Defense. The most secretive ministry in the country did launch an audit routine of their own, and they also invited volunteers to oversee the situation. Maybe because of that, they've started changing. And a number of generals lost their positions in the ministry because of that. We are still not clear why the Ministry of Culture would not do it. You know of other countries following the same suit. And the question is why the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine is still shy of it. Maybe Mr. Minister would say something. Okay, we see the table plate of Mustafa, and Mustafa standing there. We thought you were off to St. Petersburg. I'm really worried by your words and statements about lustration. Have the two of you worked with Yanukovych at the time of Yanukovych? No? Lihovy was also working at the time of Yanukovych, but I think in the at the Historic Museum. I'm sorry, I have to go because I want to say briefly. My name is Marina Skirda from the National Museum of Ukraine. I tried to address you several times. I don't remember your address. I did it during live radio broadcast, and I got your replies. And I can tell you that a person who was in position of the Secretary for Ideology in the Municipal Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine is definitely subject to lustration. Come on, how I was cleared from lustration then? This is the question for you. You know the labor record book of the person I'm referring to, and so what is your proposal then? My only proposal is, come on, let's launch an audit in the Ministry of Culture, and let's see some changes and competitive-based nominations in the ministry itself. We've started with competitive selection of our officers, and you know, by the way, are saying that we are too quick with that. Well, the question is, I'm ready to answer all of your questions. You want an audit? Give me the regulations to substantiate it, and I will launch it easily. Are there legislative requirements for change? We are already in the process of it. You want to get into our accounting office? Come on, just give us a list of persons willing to attend. I will gladly sign you in to. No, I mean professional audit companies like Ernst & Young and others to do our audit. We can invite Ernst & Young as well. We may also ask them to do it free of charge because we are not rich enough to offer to allow audit ourselves. Going back to strategy, yeah, well, but we have a bunch of issues standing here. We have illustration, audits, strategy, quite a selection to choose from. I quite share the position of Butsenko because the strategy as the text was conceived and still is a living document to be improved and amended. So the question is why we are here all together. Are we about improving the strategy, or we are just to put blame on someone? Surely in a democracy, the government should be criticized. And surely the government not willing to hear to the public can be inefficient, at least at some points. So there are questions standing for all tiers of government, from the president to the cabinet to the parliament, and where there are gaps in the dialogue, improvements should be made. But if it is about some specific document, then the public should become involved in the refining of the document, or it should strive to become the government, being mindful that it will feel arrows of criticism the very next moment it becomes the government. The Ministry of Culture and me, myself, we are completely open for all sorts of dialogue. We have the Museum Council. We had the session of this council right today, and we elected Vladyslav Pioro, the head of that council, though he is not always in agreement with the position of the ministry or the minister. Nevertheless, we did it, and there are many more examples of that. So I kindly and cordially invite all of you individually and collectively as an RPR culture group to come and to discuss whatever pleases you or is interesting to you, even if it is about philosophy. Surely there is no reason to design 2, 3 or more strategies. But conceivably, we can have, say, a text conveniently prepared by the government, for example. And by the way, we do it with involvement of people representing civic society and people from grassroots organizations, from the real cultural sector. So anyway, we can have a conventional government-made draft, and we can 1 or 2 drafts prepared by some civic initiatives. But anyway, the final objective should be to come up with a single document, not 3 or more of them. And I would not agree with Mr. Volodymyr about too quick, everything being too quick. Beside the strategy, we've designed draft legislation, historic and cultural heritage protecting, and I've already got 3 letters from various level MPs saying that we are too quick with development of these pieces of legislation. I don't think we are quick. I think it is for them and their slowness in becoming acquainted with the documents. You may never be too quick. You may at times be too slow. So just keep the pace and be ready to become engaged, to work your own version of the document, and be ready to have these specific bills to be compared and worked upon. And this will mean a lot of changes. Say it will mean changes for at least 50 bylaws at the cabinet level. And I made relevant proposals on culture reform and related documents to the council with the president of Ukraine, and I was listened to very carefully, and I was open by saying that there are multiple suggestions. I could limit myself to the document prepared by the ministry, but I wouldn't do it, and I did not do it. So let us discuss it. Let us discuss it openly. We are interested why we haven't got this type of discussion until now.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Sorry to be late. I'm going to leave even before time as well. Again, sorry. What I would like to say, I just communicated with Volodymyr and other people who are related to have something to do with culture. And I believe that the problems experienced by the Minister of Culture are pertinent to any other culture. The same situation with the Minister of Education. There is a new law about Minister of Education, and so far they do not have the full conception, a lot of different things and problems. And what I can visualize as a former journalist and a newborn politician, a new problem is that at the stage of development or drawing up of those documents, in this process are not involved people who are actually stakeholders who are interested in that. This is not the problem of ministry or whatever else. This is our problem. We are used to the situation when the country does something and the people just discuss it. But by the moment when we start the discussion, you know, we have to reach some consensus whether it's good or not. But as pertains to the cultural sphere, the major problem, as let's say, unlike the SBU or the Minister of Defense, we cannot do here without the community, without the society. We can come up with some strategy, but if the people do not want that, it's much easier to put the obstacles in the way to culture than anywhere else. Somebody will do that with some criminal intentions, and somebody because they do disagree with that. I'm not the person do not belong to the sphere of culture, but what I can hear here, that I understand there is no complete understanding what the government or people who would like to change something in this country. I do not have the understanding that they are in the same boat. I know we know Mr. Kirilenko for a long time. I have no doubt that this person is not the Soviet type person. But we know that there are some traditions and there is a system which works like that. And it seems that the person who gets into this system, and just gets into the system, because as we are new MPs, they say that all of us, we are corrupted persons. Are you corrupted? Well, no, but you know, this is the way they think about us. And being a Euro optimist, because I belong to the group of Euro optimists, we can be involved in creating some kind of joint or common platforms to discuss and to work on those documents together. Whatever document is drawn up, jointly, it can be jointly discussed. And we can come up with some kind of this social criticism, because this is mentioned in our coalition agreement, but this will not have any results or outcome, and this is not really beneficial to minister. First of all, okay, they say you adopted the law, but how it works? It doesn't work because, again, in the cultural sphere, to put obstacles is very easy, much easier than, let's say, to a policeman or to the SBO, because they have the mechanisms. And here we do not have any mechanism. Here we are talking about the will and the freedom of the people to be involved in this process. So this is not my recommendation, advice. I'm just going to extend my hand of help. Whatever is necessary from our part in the parliament to create some platforms where we can talk about culture, let's do it together. This is story number one. Story number two, which I would like this strategy to reflect, this is my proposal actually. Again, through the National Council reforms, we are going to, considering the spreading and popularization of the English language, I believe that this is the major instrument with the help of which we can integrate it to European space, because we all are victims of the space we live in. I believe the majority of the people sitting here, we get the information with the Russian speaking sources. Yeah, this is true, and they listen to those sources because they do not know the English language. And now, even in the governmental structures, among those people who studied English, the level of the English language knowledge is rather level. Again, if you need some help, I'm prepared to help you in full measure. We have a lot of different projects, maybe cultural, but more educational projects related to studying the English language. This must become the badly needed skills, not for somebody to boast that he speaks English. I would like to have a situation would be shameful not to speak English, not to English language. We have the question here. Good afternoon. My name is Elena. I'm candidate of art. I'm a member of the Council under the Minister of Culture Ukraine. I have the first question to repair culture group, where we can acquaint ourselves with your proposal regarding the strategy. And the second comment, our commission will work on the strategy, and our working group we came up with our proposals, which are already, you can acquaint yourselves on the website of the Minister of Culture, in the musical art club, whatever else, I believe that in support of the Minister of Culture, I can say that all the sources are open for the proposals, and most of our proposals were taken into consideration. So I'd like to hear the answer to my question, where we can acquaint ourselves with your proposals. Actually, we're going to start talking about that. We are going to talk about this constructive component, those values based on which, in our opinion, the priorities I'm talking about, based on which we have to build our strategy. It is with much attention and interest we acquainted ourselves with those documents, which are you can look up at the website of the Verkhovna Rada. And sorry, once I repeat myself again and again, the principle of let's say working with strategy and culture based on different directions, trends, and sectors, we believe it to be the methodologically exhaustive. I don't know whether you understand what I'm talking about, but this kind of methodology in our modern world doesn't work. It again is going to be put like in the vicious circle as a basis of strategy. We would like to start with the methodology. Esteemed colleagues, the RPR Culture Group is far from being the only player in this field. The Culture 2025 group has been in existence for a long time, and a lot of different civilian platforms start to talk about culture. There are different institutions, associations, unions, and the intellectual was a big intellectual power, and we've collected here, gathered here, and believe me, this is not something high spiritual to talk about the real policy and culture, which is going to be tackled by Larysa Venediktova.
Concerning the question, all available documents that have been presented both by the 2025 platform together with the roadmap and by other groups working on strategy development, including private proposals from individuals, proposals voiced up by various groups for the second variant of strategy. It provided changes to everything, to the structure, to directions mentioned, and everything. But we've never got any proposals from the RPR group to the official address, announced for suggestions. May I repeat myself that we've just newly created, and we decided to make an open start. I'd like to comment on our position regarding the strategy. We made it public and open in an article published on the Ukrainian website, and it may not be an official letter mailed to a specific address. Let me finish. Being just one representative of the RPR culture group, I think that the whole logic of the process is a bit flawed. Why announcing a strategy without coming to terms about the strategy itself and the institutional position regarding the strategy? It has largely remained unchanged meanwhile, and I'm glad to see Mustafa Nayem with us as a representative of the European Integration Committee, because if we speak about Europe, then the notion of government that Vyacheslav Kirilenko has mentioned many times, and we generally keep hearing more and more. It is hard to translate it into English because the issue of government or governance and public service are entirely different, and there are subtleties behind each of these. So we should speak not about the government, but about a public service, rather. So that is, at first we need to formulate the concept in more detail, the concept on the strategy. Before going any further, I think our directives that we've developed will help in this. Thank you. We accept your suggestions and proposals. We'll try to structure it in writing. If there is a questions, just please make it short as much as possible. Tatiana Sosnovska, director of the Museum of History of Ukraine. I was present at multiple sessions of the assembly before Vyacheslav was nominated to the ministerial position, and without any time to read through the suggestions he was given, he had just to sign them without looking into them. I'm sorry, it was about Mr. Nishuk, and I think that let us launch something on Spilnokosht crowdfunding site. Let us see how we are able to gather enough money for an independent international audit, maybe in some time. Previous strategies, pardon my word, they were made by a very narrow circle of some functionaries or professionals even, but they've barely been represented and presented to the public. There was a big agriculture conference in the Premier Palace, and the representative of the UK in his speech made a nice hint. He said about their variant of strategy by telling that before coming to the document, they found a vantage point. They came to an understanding that they had the cultural monitoring in cultural area, in cultural sphere, and they needed to decide on that before going to strategy. So let us be frank to ourselves by saying that this is the first ever strategy offered for public discussion. I was involved in its development and my colleagues too, and it was the first time when we were able to somehow affect the formulation of the strategy. And the strategy we're speaking about and criticizing now, with previous version, you wouldn't ever dream about it because there were some professional strategists sitting over it, not representatives of the cultural area. And speaking about the war situation in Ukraine that we mentioned with such pain in your voice, you see that the strategy does not have direct wording on that, but it is about certain steps to avoid real war also in the field of culture that is mentioned in the strategy. Being a professional and long-time worker of the cultural sector, I can say that the events we had seen a year and a half ago, they did compel the cultural community to devise the initiative that we are all discussing now. Let us understand that it is not the right time to launch criticism or become overly critical. I'm sorry, this is my private opinion, that's private but professional opinion that I want to make heard. There is openness that we have now, and it is for us to make the most benefit of this openness. Thank you. We will continue discussing these matters, and again, this is our first attempt to speak to the wider audience. Let us use it, this potential that we have now. Thank you, Katerina Batanova, Culture 2025 Group. I'm really glad to see that the RPR Culture Group is now up and going officially, and this is a big step, big leap ahead. But let me come back briefly to the British experience you expounded. There was a moment in early 90s in the UK, and they had about 2 years to brush up their strategy, and they came up with certain steps and a set of values and etc. There is a much closer period that is closer to us in many respects. It is about a couple of years from now, and it is about Estonia and its recent strategy that was adopted by the parliament in the form of a framework legislation on cultural strategy. And they also spent 2 years to refine it. I am leading here to inclusivity principle. I'm glad that Mustafa has mentioned it today. It is very hard to make people believe in things they don't want to believe in. And our group, Culture 2025, we exist since last autumn. We've been quite open in our deliberations, so we may not be set about as a group of secluded enthusiasts. But again, it is very important to see positions of those working in the cultural area today. And we also need to understand the needs of those who, may we say it, consume culture. They are as much important as those who create culture. We had a number of sessions in a variety of cities around Ukraine, and we had 25 to 50 representatives attending each session. We had recently a session with designers. Before that, we had sectoral sessions, 6 of them. We are going to have a session with journalists and media representatives coming in recent days. And I would not agree, by the way, with the point that there are no sectoral approaches in the cultural sector in Europe. There are cultural, sectoral, regional strategies. There are interests of individual interest groups in the field of culture, be it visual, audiovisual, or museum sector, etc. And I hope that by the end of June we will come up with a document which is too early to be mentioned, to name as even a draft strategy, but it will be the draft of the draft version. I would also like to point it out that the key problems in the cultural area and key challenges related to reforms in many respects are beyond the area itself, because they also concern the reform of public administration, when ministries are just, chicken with chopped out heads that may not operate properly. And they are still based largely on principles instilled 20 years ago. And this is not just about the Ministry of Culture. Next, we should add to here problems with education, because the attitudes toward culture in the society, they're also reflected through gaps in education, in economic development, etc. And we should also include the financial system, because the long-term strategy that exists, and I've never said any improvements to that even after lengthy considerations and deliberations. There is no mention there about PPP, about grant-based programs, etc. And again, it is not just the problem of the cultural sector, it is about the education sector, it is about changes to the budget code. Really, it would be important to speak today of culture being not just an economy sector, but still I'm glad to see pieces of our results made in the 2025 group included in this draft strategy. Still, the range of problems goes beyond the area of culture, and changes may come only with wider changes made in the government and in the nature. Thank you. We do hope that the RPR and its cultural dimension will truly continue evolving as an interdisciplinary platform because we have people working on administrative reform sitting right in the neighboring hall here now. And maybe we will be able to work in a concerted way. And now it's time for a more constructive part of our agenda, which is about the working version of specific directions of the cultural policy, the ones that we'd like to discuss with professional communities, the ministry, the line ministry, and other partners. The floor is now to Larysa Artyuhina.
I would like to start not from directives, I'm sorry. We are very much time pressed, limited in time. I believe, well, very briefly, there is some kind of let's say the sphere or the sector, whatever it makes, marginates the culture. When the minister said that those positions should not be politicized, this marginalization of policy or politics, I believe those two things, culture and the politics in our country, are marginalized. I didn't hear what I said. When you were talking about politicization of this contest for the feeling of embracing the position, let's say, offices, well, this is, for the sake of discussion. Okay, regarding the strategy and monitoring, there was no monitoring done. And this strategy is taken just from the Syrian, from the area, like the previous ones. Now about some constructive part. The European Culture Group believes that the critical situation in Ukraine requires to place the focus on the cultural policy, not strategy. I'm going to emphasize this because we need clear priorities which this country, the government believes that the foundation for the state policy, generally speaking. I agree with what has been said by my colleague, that this policy must influence the state policy. The key thesis of ours is that what we have to change the paradigm of the culture in involving the private interests in order to create the conditions for the function and development of culture. And here we approach our proposal to consider culture as function, to consider it through its functioning, through those three big functional pillars. I'm talking about the preservation of cultural heritage, modernization of the existing processes, and innovative thinking. In order to create such a document, well, there we developed the structure, which includes an analysis of the situation, the conception of the changes to be introduced, modification, legislative modifications. I'm talking about the program of introduction of those directives and the plan for each branch of the power of the authorities. This is the structure of a document. Now I'm going to name here those items. We have 11 all in all. In following each, you can put your questions, should you have those, or comments. Once again, dear audience, we propose, this is just kind of a working optional version. There are some things which can be separated. We are going to start the professional discussion on this subject matter. Number one, to consider culture of the foundation of modernization in Ukraine, imparting the priority to this cultural policy. I believe this doesn't cause any objection on anybody's. Number two, to consider culture the key factor to prevent the social conflicts and foundation for the unification or uniting the society. Number two, sorry, we all have in printed, printed version. Our colleague, I believe we had all this printed out at the entrance to this room. We believe that everybody will take it. Number two, to consider culture to be the key factor to prevent social conflicts and the foundation for uniting the whole society. Any questions? Should you have any questions? Should. Yep. Everybody is for that. Okay. Esteemed colleagues, give me one copy. We are going just to Xerox that. We had a lot of different copies here. Each of the items which have been voiced here, which are called the title directives, will be further developed into more broad, I would say, analytical text. We already have some comments to some of those, and for the rest of them, I expect those comments from these professionals. Again, declaration, what we have to do. We have to introduce fundamental modifications to the legislation in Ukraine to dismantle the Soviet type of management of culture and turn it into some kind of self-regulation of culture. That's what we need to do in order for culture to really become the foundation of the social life. Next item, to create the foundations for the colonial selection based on the equality and partnership principles. Any questions? May I? Andriy Bodarenko, member of the Composers Union of Ukraine, also representative of the public committee under the web committee. Well, I'm listening to those items. They were beautifully sounding, you know, it's very good to... I personally recognize that, but we have to specify who has to consider that and how it should be reflected in legislation or whatever. And there is another point. Those items which were voiced here a few minutes ago. On one hand, there was a very correct thesis that culture is one of the components of the national security of Ukraine. I absolutely agree with that. At the same time, you say that culture must be self-regulated, and there should not be any influence on culture on the part of the ministry. You know, there's some kind of contradiction between the items. The state has to influence the culture in order for the culture to develop along the specific lines. Once again, I repeat how it should be introduced. First, the copies were printed out. There was a lot of those copies at the entrance. You know, sorry if that number was not sufficient for everybody to have it. This copy of this document, I mean. Who has to recognize the culture? I mean, or what? By everybody, the society. Which means by the state. Actually, this draft document, so far this is draft document, has to become the draft law, well, due to which must be some system of its introduction. Is this clear? Okay, good, thank you. Okay, system of introduction, I mean. Sorry, we cannot hear the speaker without the mic. For the third time, I repeat, we started this process and we invited you here to discuss it together. What we propose right now, this is the draft document, the working version. In the majority of European countries, the cultural policy is fixed by law. In one of the precedents of adoption of directives cultural policy, for example, in France or in Lithuania, the draft directives adopted by the whole society, the level of the values, and we would like to start this process. We would like to start talking about that now. Sorry, Larysa. Next one, to create the conditions for existence of culture, the complicated dynamic structure. All types of culture must be present there, and the important cultural products and practice must be localized and Ukrainian globalized. Is that clear? wonderful. To introduce new approaches to financing and simulative cultural processes. Here I'm going to elaborate on that point item a bit more. In order for the cultural policy to be democratic and the authorities indeed reflected this democratic system, we have to do one simple thing. Those who formulate the cultural policy or strategy, they cannot distribute the money or the funds. Those two things must be separated. This is a key thesis, you know. Nowhere in the normal civilized world, cultural world, cannot be so that those who actually streamline the policy, he cannot distribute the money as well. This is very important. This first item, you know, regarding other approaches to financing. The second item is redistribution, I would say breaking down into the basic and the project financing. And the project financing must actually attract money from the excise for the tobacco or alcohol products, and this innovation culture never will depend upon any kind of rates, because you know alcohol, beverages, and tobacco products are always enjoying great demand. Speaking about intellectual property and actually the streamlined law on the copyrights and the adjacent or let's say related rights. Number 8, introduce new concept in the sphere of culture and art to ensure the equal access to culture and art for the whole life. And again, speaking about the cultural heritage and on the basis of individuality, etc. To compare the cultural development with development of the villages, countryside, and the cities, and also to recognize this as one of the top priorities of the stable development of this country. Now a bit more about the second item, where we focused our attention mostly now.
We think the conflict unfolding now is the conflict of values that is coming to being even earlier, probably back in Soviet times, and this is a about Soviet mentality that hasn't vanished. It still exists in the structure of the Ministry of Culture, in its hierarchy of culture management. The culture does not need any management in this regard. If we are to manage the culture or arts, we will see two emotions developing in people. Because if there is someone else who's responsible, say, for decision making, then there is another one who is subject under control. And in this case, he will never be free, he will never be responsible for his own actions, and he will only demand to be provided with everything he needs. That's why we won't see free culture in this country, and we will always fall in the trap of who's better, what's better, the Soviet past or the Ukrainian present, or the American Revolution or some other revolution. Everything that is happening now is because not a single step has been done away from the Soviet past for 24 years. The only attempt that the Ukrainian nation has ever made was to commercialize culture, to reintroduce the once ideology-based system in a kind of economically based model. That is, we need to recognize that we still linger in Soviet past, at least partially, but all of us. Thank you. Anton, a question or remark, please. First of all, thank you. We are finally with some written proposals. Some of them are similar to specific language in the strategy. When we speak about culture policy and cultural strategy, these are two different terms. There is culture policy, there is cultural strategy that defines how policy is implemented. And speaking of directives, I just happen to remember the traditional directive-based style with having regard to and things like that. That is, we have a specific directive number 517 signed already by Yanukovych. There was no strategy in Yanukovych and in his time, but there was some directive that he managed to push through. It was a kind of English-based copycat to facilitate understanding, to avoid maybe speaking about guidelines, but guidelines are really guiding lines. This is an entirely different thing again. Anyway, directive is one thing, guidelines is another thing. Whether in this country or elsewhere, yeah, debates about terms used is also important one. This is about the need to have common language, because again, there are differences, profound differences between culture policy and culture strategy. We may never unite them, and we've never united them. We've never attempted. But some of the positions and the strategy strongly resemble cultural policy language. Have you read it yourself? Well, that's definitely about establishing a common glossary of terms used. And exactly in the European glossary we'll find the term of directive, and this is what we borrowed from them, and we might use it. My dear colleagues, there is a question, and there is a there are questions, and there is a possibility to discuss. Anyone is invited, whether from the RPR culture group or expert community. We still have 20 minutes that we may use to discuss or to answer questions. Again, the roundtable format envisages at least a start of discussion. This is what we've started. We are ready to take your arrows, but please collaborate, communicate, produce, come up with theses, even if controversial ones, give your suggestions. And really, there are profound differences between policy and strategy. Mr. Oleksandr, we do understand it. At least we in our group, we started with developing key points of cultural policy. Thank you. I'd like to thank for the paper-based version of the proposals, yet still I have some questions to make. We need more details about the notion of culture itself. What do you in your RPR group understand this? Maybe it is a bit philosophical, but still. And then there is a need for more detail in some of these 11 points. There were words about culture-based self-identification. There is a mention of a new concept of culture in arts and education, what it is about. Then there is a mention of decolonializational option to be made by the Ukrainian nation. What do you mean by that? Surely it requires some profound understanding, and given the language we used, we had some doubts as to we need to circulate the paper because we need to finalize and brush up our own version first. That is, the document is a very rough one. Yeah, indeed, it's just the very rough version of the draft. I'd like to repeat to you again that these are not proposals to the strategy suggested by the Ministry of Culture. these are some of the theses or points that we'd like to discuss with expert community. Anna Nugins, the Musicians Union of Ukraine. We've read quite a number of draft legislations on culture throughout the past decade, and the draft directive that we have here now looks for me quite of utopia-based document, because it is entirely not understandable how each of these points will be implemented in practical terms. It is written very elegant, but it reminds me strongly of the piece of legislation on culture that was made at the time of President Yushchenko. It was all beauty, but without any mention of a working scheme to be implemented in the field of culture. This is really more about utopian vision. And a small remark, there was a consideration made here that the needs of cultural development should be given broader view, not sectoral, but broader, general view. I do not agree with it, because in the first draft of a cultural development document, there was no mention of such category as, the cultural category, as performing arts, particularly performing musicians and authors. It's about 20,000 of creative musicians and composers all over the country. And we may find ourselves profoundly lost in your strategy. This is my personal comment. Because of that, we made a letter to the Minister of Culture, Vyacheslav Kirilenko, on that matter. And we, as the Union of Musicians of Ukraine, expressed our intention to become a member in this group that deals with reform. The International Federation of Musicians trade unions also signed a letter to the minister. Please, thank you so much, but please, let me repeat it again. These directives, let's have this working name of directives. There is already, or there will be, an analysis of the concept of changes. And there will be implementation plan and action plan for each branch of the government and power. Do you understand how the mechanism of implementation will work? Next, what can or should be done for the sake of deregulation, for the sake of creating conditions for self-regulation in the area of culture? It is necessary to make the model of cultural policy a democratic one, that is, by separating the administrative and fund managing functions, by establishing a special council of culture with the ministry, or by reorganizing the ministry into a number of agencies with special attention to modern and innovative forms of culture. A remark to here. I'm sure that it will be only me who will help you to reorganize the Ministry of Culture. You won't find any support anywhere, because I'm interested in that, and you will find no other interested in that. So are we hostages of what you're interested in or not interested in? My dear colleagues, let us make it clear again. If you have a question, please ask for a mic to convey the message. Serhiy Haletiy, our PR group member, we are hostages of the situation to the extent that we always go on sideways. The directives were conceived as a kind of objective setting document, because a strategy should look for certain objectives and targets. We need to come up with targets, and then we'll have a strategy to reach these targets. And the strategy may not be adopted in its current format, and the very approach of, hey, give us your proposals, I think it's an old-time methodology, because it all should start with designing a strategy structure, a backbone of it, involving specific consultants. Otherwise, it will be a bunch of old documents reshuffled for current purposes. So there is a mention of a culture producing certain products which are subject to copyright, intellectual property protection, etc. Not a mention of it here. Everyone knows also about digital culture. Most of creative industry is being present on the internet. And in the strategy here we see about attention to be paid to digital and internet technologies. This is rubbish. I represent this filmmaking sector from my sectoral viewpoint. This is just a concoction of 4 or 5 phrases that serve no purpose, that have no specific target, that show nothing about what to do with filmmaking studios or etc. It is not a strategy, it's a collection or concoction of old imitation documents. From here, we need to come up with upper levels that the culture here should reach. There was a mention that Terry Sandel yesterday said some good words about the culture. He, being a diplomatic person himself, he didn't christen this. He just said that it is good to see you're moving somewhere. And I think he was also saying that we are just standing in 2 boats, one being the Soviet and another the modern, and we risk drowning in between of them. Check for cinematographic reform agenda that Terry Sandel presented. They had a group comprising 11 or 12 top-notch professionals, and each of them analyzed all the segments of filmmaking industry to come up with ideas and targets of development. So they did understand that their producers were only dealing with production and not in the best of the ways. That is, they analyzed each segment very carefully to see what the gaps are, where deficiencies are, and the strategy is just an empty piece of paper that will serve for nothing, even if we adopt it, because it contains no ideas or mechanisms for implementation. Thank you, Serhiy. Let's still stick with the terminology of respect that we should use here. We've heard Mr. Minister saying recently that he is probably the only one interested in reorganization of the Ministry of Culture. I'd like to know in more detail when we can expect some statement from the ministry on its reorganization and what the steps in this reorganization will be. I think as soon as you will write to me how you're going to reorganize the ministry, because it is not just for jokes, it's a serious matter. But there is a government election plan where it was stated that you should analyze European mechanism, you should analyze them and inspect them by April this year, March this year. Did you complete the task? It was said that you should analyze functional responsibilities of European ministries of culture. Yes, we go along the plan. According to the plan, you can come to join our seminars. You will hear all the information on that. And we had the Minister of Culture of Latvia here with us. We discussed the question. We had also the Ministers of Culture from Lithuania and Georgia. So if you're hard to accept our work, this doesn't mean that we are not doing anything. Then you should notify us about it. Please welcome to our website. There is everything there. Okay, let us break this vicious circle of discussion here. My comment first goes to you, Mr. Minister. I hear from you that you're ready for reforms, and I still perceive there are just populist statements behind it. Those empty slogans that want to to cover the actions, the elections, and I think that in some respect you still can affect how people are nominated to positions in the ministry. And it has been said several times today that the Ministry of Culture today is a Soviet derelict body, and it is only able to reproduce the situation it was conceived for. Problems with implementation of competitive selection procedure, all-time terminology used in all walks of ministerial life. They all indicate the dearth of cultural managers, professional cultural managers in the country, in the best meaning of it. That is, those people who would not argue much about what's the primary source, whether it is the strategy or the policy, because it is understandable from the managerial point of view that it first goes with vision, with mission, with the concept, and strategy is just a mere tool of implementation of everything. That is, you may not design a strategy without having the top level of understanding of everything. Yet still, I'm glad to see professionals in front of me now, and I'm glad to have this discussion, which is not even a discussion because we need to come to terms with our common terminology even. And I see some part of community here that doesn't understand the terms and sees no reason in discussing further about terms. And there is profound misunderstanding from the other part of the audience. And I think it may prevent our further cooperation given this wild variety of vocabularies that we use. This is just a remark from my side, because Mr. Minister, if you really are in for reforms, then probably you should look for professional managers. Give me the names, I will write them down, I will sketch them. Let's not be populist in that. No, this is not populism, let's be specific. There is a competitive selection procedures to be used here. No, I want names. If you have expert who has been neglected for that, well, we had our suggestions regarding who should be taken away from this. Let us not make this impression that there is a profound misunderstanding in lack of your input. Come on, let us not go into much detail of your efforts to help the cultural heritage survive and all other steps that you've been making. I'm not going into those degrading details. I want to come back to basic things. No, I want to tell you what. You work in the National Museum of Art. You are a staff member and you have a very standard salary back from the Soviet time. So, okay, if you have people, like-minded people there, just collect them as a group and let's work together, rather than asking me to sack Mr. Lihovoy, Deputy Minister of Culture. Let us sit together. I want to return the question to you. Do you know of my job description? I am a citizen of Ukraine that has hired you as the minister to perform your functions. We are all the citizens, and your thesis and your point stated that we are all equal. Now I want you to perform your responsibilities as intended. Dear colleagues, we have 2 minutes to go, and I would suggest that we continue with discussion at our platforms that we have, whether with their PR culture team or elsewhere, during all other outlets. Maria Baranivska, Telekritika. Mr. Minister, I'd like to address you as a journalist, as an individuality who has been involved in highlighting many recent developments in the field of culture. And many times there was criticism against your ministry and you yourself. And I would speak out of my civic heart by saying that the previous government also did not expect the burning tires in front of their offices. And you cannot even imagine the critical potential accumulating in the society, also against your Ministry of Culture. You're pretty much confident now that there will be no burning tires in front of the ministry that you chair of. But if you will keep deaf to the people, to the public, you will see these tires appearing there. Well, we are not discussing the work of the ministry now. This is not the subject topic of our discussion. We are being asked to wrap up our discussion. Just one more remark. It is only when we will not speak about personalities, whether it is Nishuk or Kirilenko or someone else, we will be able to speak about culture and discuss culture. Just 1 minute, 60 seconds. Maybe I will be a bit more emotional in my closing words of this discussion, but sorry for that, but the presence of the minister, the presence of 2 my deputies here says that we are really open for discussion. Anyone working has criticism fired against. It would be easier for me to hide from criticism, to refrain from doing anything. I have never been like that. I will never be like this, whether I was in a party, in the parliament, or at this my current position. I'm always open for discussion. I do hope that people in this audience understand that there is not a single one with a monopoly on truth, and any concept, any text produced is not an expression of that monopoly. It can and may be criticized. And I came here with the only reason in mind to state that we are ready to work with the community, with the public. I want you to join to brush up this final text. We have 11 topics mentioned in this list. I have much to say on each of these, but this is not the topic of our current meeting. I can tell you that we have a document called Draft Long-Term Concept. The key question is where we will go further on. There is a managerial question. Do we have to go each to our own office to work independently, trying to squeeze our individual visions? Or we should sit together to work on a common document of strategy, and then we will see how we will implement them. I am ready for all sorts of discussions and debates. I repeat it once again. If you have some personal matters, then please understand this is political dimension of it, and this is for the parliament to decide which minister to keep, which minister to sack. The text you have in your hand, this is a political matter and political consideration. Thank you all. We have to wrap up our roundtable discussion. I'd like to thank all the colleagues, all professionals, journalists, people from the RPR, and our colleagues from the ministry. We need to continue speaking and debating the topic. And again, may I invite you to our remuneration package of reforms as our communication and debate platform. And we may agree on the next meeting with the ministry with more detailed expression of our vision. I cordially invite all of you at any time you find appropriate for you. Thank you. Maybe we'll meet in a week right here, maybe this time